Greetings, everybody. It's a beautiful spring day. I'm here at home at my mom's fiance's house, and I'm on lockdown for coronavirus, as many other people are. And because I can't go anywhere, I'm getting ready to start my garden. Gardening is something that makes me happy and connects me with the earth. And I'm looking to share this journey with you and share a little bit of what I know about gardening and hopefully help you get started too. So to begin, we're going to talk about garden planning. This is something I like to do before I plant my garden in the spring so that I know what I want to plant and I can be calculated in how I go about it. So I broke it down into 3 basic steps. First, you should know your space. Then you should know your plants. And then you make a map. And the map helps you visualize where you're going to plant the plants that you intend to put in the ground. Coming down to my garden, here it is. So first we're going to get to know this space before we decide what we're going to plant where. So in knowing your space, you should consider where is sunny and where is shady. For me, it's really easy to see that everything gets a lot of sun here. In knowing the sun versus shade patterns, you should know the cardinal directions. There's east, so the sun rises there every morning, comes across the sky here, and then sets there in the west. And this was a really smart placement for a garden because it catches the sun, all the sunlight as it passes through the southern part of the sky. And if it's your first time planting a garden, you should keep this in mind. Another important factor to consider when planting a garden is your water source. Where will you get your water and how? For me, I'm lucky because we have municipal water source. So I have as much water as I need anytime through a hose. And especially if you have a larger garden, you should consider distance from your water source. And this ties into my second point about knowing your plants. So if you know that some of your crops are much more water intensive, you could plant them closer to your water source. That way you don't have to bring the hose or the bucket, however you transport your water, as far to water them. In knowing your space, it's also important to identify any permanent objects. For example, here I have a pot with a blueberry bush, and it's permanent as long as I leave it there, and I don't intend to move it, so I'm going to factor this in when I create my garden map. Also, you should know the dimensions of your space. If you have a large garden with several beds, you could approximate for the actual area of your space, but you should know the dimensions of each bed for when you're planting. I've already measured this out using this roll. The second step in planting your garden is knowing your plants. So you should know what you want to plant, and if you grew in your garden last year, you should know what you planted then in the different beds. This is important because you want to rotate your crops. If you plant the same species in the same soil over and over again, what can happen is bacterial and fungal and insect populations can build up. They get used to that certain plant, and it'll reduce the quality of your harvest in subsequent years. And also, if you're planting the same crop, it's going to keep utilizing the same nutrients until the soil is depleted, and it's not going to grow. Your crop won't grow well, and your soil quality will degrade. Over many years, farmers have figured out how to rotate their crops well, and I'll include a link down below with some information on what you can do in your rotation. But one example is if I planted a heavy crop of tomatoes in my garden in the previous year, I should grow cruciferous vegetables this year, including kale. A simple rotation cycle is made up of 4 groups. So you have your crucifers, like your kale, and you have your nightshades, like tomatoes and eggplants. You also have your roots, like beets and radishes, and you have your legumes, beans. And it's good to cycle these out over 4 seasons. And the cucurbits, like melons and cucumbers, and also lettuces, can be grown at any time in this cycle. if your garden is comprised of several beds, what you can do is figure out what you planted last year in each of the beds, and then plan for this year to plant a new crop in the rotation. And then you can rotate your beds over the years and have a good cycle so that the soil is constantly replenished as you're growing. If you have a garden like mine, just one big plot, what you could do is divide your garden into 4 segments and then rotate those. Once you know what you want to grow, you should figure out the space and the light requirements of each plant. So here's some seed packets that I have, and this is what I'll be planting in my garden this year. And if you look at the back of any seed packet, it'll tell you the depth of the plant, the spacing that your plant needs, the height that it will grow to, and also the time in the season when it should be planted. So plant spacing is especially important, and especially in making your map, because then you can decide how far apart to put your plants so that they have the space that they need to grow to full maturity. The planting depth is something that will come in handy when you're actually putting your seeds in the ground, but the height of your plants can be really important consideration when you're making your map. So this is cilantro here, and it grows to almost 2 1/3 feet tall. Tomatoes are another example. These are indeterminates, which means that they will just keep growing taller and taller without ending. So, like with my garden, I know that everything this far on the right side, the farthest out, will catch the most sun. And if I planted my tomatoes in the front here, they might shade out all my crops. Now, if my crops like shade, that's a good thing. But if the other crops need more sunlight, then I would want to plant my tomatoes farther back. Knowing the depth requirements of your plants is important too. Here I have a very shallow section of the garden. This is maybe 3 inches deep. I can't go much deeper than that. But over here, the front, I can go very deep, maybe a couple feet. So if I'm planting carrots per se, they're going to grow deep. So I want to plant them where they have enough space to grow down. And something like microgreens or some small lettuce are going to grow very shallow roots, so I could plant them farther back where they don't need much space to go down. Knowing when to plant and harvest your crops will also help you in making your garden map. So for example, this is spinach here, and according to this, it says I should plant between March and April. And it'll take 45 days to harvest. That's a month and a half. So it's almost the beginning of April. So by the time I harvest, it'll be halfway through May. My tomatoes here, they can go in for anywhere between April and June. So I could wait. I could plant my whole garden with spinach and harvest in time to put my tomatoes in the ground. And perhaps by the time I harvest the tomatoes, I could plant another round of spinach because they can go in again in late summer as a fall crop. In step 3, we're going to put all of this together by making a map. So I have here written all of the dimensions, all of the plants and the space requirements for each. And I have already started drawing my garden map. So you should draw to scale as best as you can. I have the dimensions, the length, and the width of my garden here. And I also have the depths. I have the back is shallow and the front is deep. I've also included the permanent features. So here's a blueberry bush in a pot and some spearmint and other herbs that I've decided to leave. And also, I forgot, you're going to want to put the compass rose. So here's east, west, north, south. And the sun rises there, crosses the sky, sets over here. It's always important to orient your map to the 4 cardinal directions. So next, with all this information, I'm going to draw out where I want to put rows of each of my plants. So here's my finished garden map. I took a little break and filled it out. So I added, using my ruler, I kind of measured out a little graph here to help me in my calculations. So I have my beets here in the front, and where it's the most deep, and my radishes right behind it. And they both need 18 inches apart. So I spaced them using these marks. And then back here I have rows of kale and mesclun. They also needed a lot of space from 18 inches. And then here I have 2 rows of spinach. They only needed about 1 foot from each other. And I'm gonna pack them in there a little bit, a little close to the kale, but I figure that's okay. And the spinach, maybe it'll enjoy some of the shade from the kale. We'll see. And then right there in the back, where it's most shallow, I put the arugula. And they didn't need much spacing, just about a half foot. I have 2 rows of cilantro in here. They also only needed a half foot. And then I figure I'll try and put some cilantro plants in here too. We'll see what happens. And so my plan is that probably by the time these are all ready to harvest, it'll be about time for the tomatoes to go on the ground. So once I harvest these, maybe I'll plant some more cilantro and just fill the bed with tomatoes. And I'll probably make another garden map there too when that time comes. So here's a little example of how to do a garden map. I hope this helps.